Welcome to the Society Pod, a podcast for entrepreneurs, marketers, and leaders. Here's your host, Jessica Yarmy.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Society Pod. My guest today is on a mission to develop athlete entrepreneurs and explore the overlap between high-performance athletics and high-performance executives. We are the perfect connection, actually. She studies high-performance lifestyle brand development rooted in neuroscience, rooted in psychology. We're going to get into mindset today. We're going to get into athletics and kids and parenting and all of those things. So welcome to the show, Colette Beyer.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. It's great to be here.
I love this topic, and I love that you and I connected. I don't even know how you came across
I can tell you.
Okay, go ahead.
I am a marketer at heart, and I track all my sources. I was searching for people that have written, I have a binder. I will not pick it up right now, but I have a binder of research on athletes and athlete entrepreneurship and success in business. And I was looking for articles, and I found somebody posted more of a blog post. It was on LinkedIn. You commented on it, and I was like, who is this woman? And I had to find out who you were. And I followed you and connected with you and sent you a message and said, will you please be a case study interview? And here we are.
I am so passionate about this topic, and I don't talk about it a lot because it is somewhat of a niche topic. And I think it's a topic that almost in a way I worry about talking about it a little bit, because I have been told in my past or in my present, that I come across as intimidating, unapproachable, intense. And my athletic side is a more intimidating, unapproachable, and intense side of myself. So I don't talk about it a ton, but I have written a Medium article about this, The Athlete's Guide to Entrepreneurship. And I love that you're digging into this, because I think there's so many overlaps between entrepreneurship, athletics, and high performance in both of those arenas. So I'm happy to go wherever you want to go with this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, I love it. I mean, and obviously distilling it all down and bringing it back to the thesis that really powers Driven Human as a business and as a lifestyle brand is that in life, only about 2% of the most hyper-driven individuals in the world who ultimately become high-level athletes, special forces operators in the military, and 6, 7, 8, 9-figure entrepreneurs. It's really that 2% of the population that just is highly, highly driven. And that is a result of 5 different components. High performance is constituted by genetics predominantly. There is a nature component here, but we'll talk a lot about the nurture piece too. But the nurture piece is that deliberate practice, the coaching, the opportunity, and the luck, and how we can really influence the luck. So I would love to know, just kind of winding back the clock. You obviously played Division I soccer, but what kind of led you to that point? We were talking a little bit before we started to record about children and the world of youth sports today, which, if you don't know this, I was told the new valuation figures for the youth sports industry is nearing $50 billion. It was not $50 billion in the 1990s. We'll just leave it at that. So I'm curious to know, did you just jump out of the womb and start kicking a soccer ball?
So it's funny that you lead with genetics, because I am also a second born. And I think some of my competitive nature comes from being a second born. So my sister's 1 year older than me, and she played soccer.
Oh, you're close
so
in age then.
Yeah. And so when I was 5 or 6, I started playing soccer. And I played my whole life. I think it was around 13, 14 when I started to really get into more of the club soccer and travel soccer and state level soccer. I ran track in middle school. I played field hockey and swam in high school. And so I always had soccer was always the backdrop. And you asked me what other sports I played, and I was good at field hockey. But when I got to a place of what sport would I want to play 3 times a day in college all year long, I could play soccer all day long and not get tired of it. Whereas field hockey was something to do to stay in shape for soccer. So soccer was always my primary sport, and it started very, very early. I had no athletic pivot in my life.
Okay. It's fascinating stuff, and we can get into this, but one of the latest studies that came out about the connection between athletes becoming entrepreneurs and ultimately also, C-suite executives, especially after they'd been a founder for other companies in particular, is that solo sport athletes, believe it or not, the connection is there, but not with team athletes, which I'm really, really interested. But just the fact that you talked about the fact that you swam, that's obviously an individual sport. And you said there was one other. What was your one other individual sport?
Track.
Yeah, I love my runners. There's something to that. So, but you have both, which, it really is a balancing act, right? I mean, the solo sport, and I was a solo sport athlete in many ways, but I was also a team athlete. Having both of those experiences just really does develop your cognitive thinking and behavioral skills and just the neural pathways in your brain to be able to take your driven nature, cultivate it, which ultimately fast forwarding into your career initially as an employee, rising up through the levels to the more of the C-suite executive level, and then ultimately making the jump into entrepreneurship. You're very fortunate that you had that background and weren't forced to be sport specific at a young age and pick soccer at the age of 7. And that's it, all year round, because you have an opportunity here to really grow into a formidable, not only executive, but also entrepreneur.
And it's a long game.
Yeah.
And so what are you going to do that's not going to burn you out? And I think a lot of people jump into business or jump into entrepreneurship and they go so hard, so heavy that they can't sustain the work that it takes to be successful. And I told you I loved playing soccer, and I was like, this is the sport that I know I could play all day long and not get sick of it. And now I'm in an entrepreneurial seat and I'm doing marketing things. I'm doing fitness things. I'm doing franchising things, all of the things that I love and can play in all day long, talking with amazing people on podcasts. All of these things I could do all day long and not get sick of it. So when you see 20 years from now, I'm still playing this game, you're gonna be like, oh, I get it. Like, she's insane and could do this for the rest of her life. Like, that's the game that I'm playing. And if you're not that obsessed with what you're doing, you're not going to be able to perform at that high level for that long-term period of time.
That is so incredibly important. We talk about the 9 genetic and psychological traits that make you driven. And one of those is obsession, among many other things, being a shapeshifter and able to change roles and rapidly build rapport and, all the others that go along with it. But getting back to that obsession point, the ability to be able to stick with something and see it through in the long run. I like to say that entrepreneurship is the ultimate sport. It's not the UFC. It actually is the game of life is played out in business. And I'm curious to know, when the playing days, well, first of all, were you entrepreneurial as a kid? Did you have the lemonade stand? Were you that kid out there mowing lawns in the middle of the summer? What did you have a background in entrepreneurship while you were an athlete growing up?
I had a background in making money early on. Like, when I was 13 or 14, I had a paper route and started working at a golf course as a golf caddy. And as soon as I connected the fact that like work equaled dollars equaled freedom and being able to do what I wanted to do, I immediately connected to that game. And I didn't think of it at the time as an entrepreneurship kind of game. I thought of it at the time as be as big of a boss as I could be in my career. And my goal career-wise was to oversee a marketing department for a fitness company. And that was it. Like, that was my goal. And I got to that 6 years ago. And so it's like, what now? And that's what's been fun is I hit my goal. Nothing changed. Like, I'm just more in it now. The goalposts have just moved. Now I'm on to like the next big, more like a legacy kind of goal.
Excellent. I love that. Yeah. Like Legacy, which is the name of, believe it or not, is the name of the athlete brand camp that I run. It's called Legacy. It's really, really important to really be deliberately thinking about what it is that you want your life to look like. It sounds to me like you have benefited from the fact that you were not defined by the fact that you were a soccer player. You weren't just an athlete. You weren't just a soccer player. You knew that at a certain point that the playing days were going to come to an end and there was going to be a next stage of life. So I'm curious to know, as you were coming out of college and your playing days of Division I soccer were coming to an end, did you feel a sense of loss, a void at all, a loss of purpose? I know that's something that I commonly hear from people, especially as, you know, their playing days come to an end or they're out processing from the military or some sort of uniformed service after having been an athlete also. So what was your transition like from college to the working world and being an employee?
I did pretty quickly start to work, which I think was helpful. And I was working in marketing, and just like I'd been like a lifelong soccer player, I've been like a lifelong marketing person. So like I didn't have a void, at least from a career perspective. I did have a void competitively or athletically or from a drive perspective. Like, what is my goal? I didn't know what my goal was that early on, right out of school. So I ran 2 marathons in retirement. Like I had those athletic explorations where I was like, what am I going to do with all my competitiveness now? And I had a transition out of timing everything. And even in marathon training, my first marathon, I did it with a lot of like watch on, timed runs, timed, you know, all the distances mapped out and written down. And that really took a lot of undoing to kind of take myself off of the grid a little bit. And to this day, if I run, I don't run with a watch. I couldn't tell you how far I go. Like I've really tried to remove myself from the athletic measurements. And I've more so tried to put myself onto the entrepreneurship measurements, you know, into that game, like put all the energy there as opposed to the, you know, sometimes you can just over obsess with yourself athletically. And now I'm just in an over obsessed place from an entrepreneurship perspective.
I love that, because the obsession never goes away. And one of the biggest things I like to say is that being driven is just this incredible life force and this light that comes out of somewhere between 2 and 10% of the population. And for people like you that are hyper driven, 2%. And that light is a wonderful, powerful thing. It can illuminate all sorts of territory. But the problem is that when a light is like diffused, like a lantern, right, or a lighthouse, it's not focused. And if you can focus that light, I mean, what's the definition of a hyper-focused light? It's a laser beam, right? So that focus that you were able to just innately, fortunately, realize that you needed, and you ultimately shifted it into your career, is more than likely what you kind of took one obsession and just sort of put it in a new place, if that makes sense. And that's a trait of driven humans that are healthy when their playing days are over and they no longer have that sort of structure and conduit of home and school and sport to really kind of keep them going. Because as you and I both know, going into the corporate world and becoming an employee, if you don't actively take a role in shaping what that experience is like, it very well may not turn out to be a place that really kind of develops you, I guess you can say, as a high performance human.
Yeah, you talked earlier about making a decision of like what kind of person I want to be or like how I want to do life. And what I've come to learn about myself, and I've tried to embrace, you know, although there's both sides of the coin, there's 2 edges to the sword. How you do one thing is how you do everything. So you show up to this podcast 10 minutes early. I show up to basically everything 10 minutes early. There's people who go extra miles on everything. And there's other people who won't ever go an extra inch. And so I think athletics teaches you, are you an extra mile person, or are you an extra inch person, or are you just not going to participate at all and just check out of that game? But then to your point, like when you get out of school and you have that drive or you have that like intensity about how you do things, but you don't have something that you're passionate about enough to really channel your intensity, that's where people feel lost, because it's like, I have all this energy that I want to put toward something. Like, I do everything intense as could be. But if you don't have a calling, or if you don't have something that you're intense about, you kind of have, you feel that like disconnectedness, or you feel that lost. Like, I don't relate to people. I don't relate to what I'm doing in my day to day. Like, my habits are messed up. You don't have a goal. You don't have a direction. And I think that's where a lot of people miss. And that's what entrepreneurship is so good about doing, is like taking whatever you're super intense about, whatever it is. For me, it's marketing and it's fitness and it's franchising. But for you, it could be something totally different. For somebody else, it's going to be totally different. But like, identify what do you love and can do all day long, and then build a business around it. And it could be a side hustle for a bit. It could be, dive in full time, however you want to approach it. But at least you have something to really put your heart and soul into, because you're used to putting your heart and soul into something every single day, 3 times a day. And when you don't have that outlet, you do feel lost.
Absolutely. And I tell this story about how Driven Human really came to be. And I spent the first 10 years of my career in political marketing and branding in Washington, D.C., and ultimately was laid off right after my 30th birthday, 2 weeks before Christmas, and was at a fork in the road and had to decide. And I realized the work that I was doing was meaningless. There was no purpose in what I was doing, and I burned it all to the ground. I mean, thankfully, I had always had a side hustle. I was encouraged to moonlight and consult on the side by my bosses, because that's the nature of DC. You could be in, the majority one minute and in the minority the next, and out of a job. So I was able to turn that spigot on and keep the money rolling, and, make some adjustments to my style of living, and sell everything that I own practically, and, and go down to a level of income that was about half of what I was used to living on at that point. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the difference that made in me making that shift, I was on duty in the middle of the night, and we came across a man who, if I told you his name and showed you his picture, you would go, oh yeah, that's so-and-so that played for this particular professional team. And he was homeless, drug addicted, and under a bridge, literally. And I love talking to people, and talking to him, I said, I have to ask, like, what happened? And an injury happened, and the injury led to pain pills, and the pain pills led to heroin. And the story is very, very common. Unfortunately, you just don't hear it a lot with high profile individuals that, end up under a bridge. So when you say that, it's the drive never goes away. It just has to be channeled in a new positive direction. And I got goosebumps when you said, that you have to go, the extra mile. I rode my bicycle across the country in college, and I have a framed piece of artwork on my desk that was given to me by a woman who was my boss in college. And I interviewed her son today to be my chief of staff. And he found me randomly. He lives in my neighborhood. How did that happen? I don't know. But it says persist. Go the extra mile. It's never crowded. With that being said, when you were working in marketing and realizing, did you initially fall into fitness marketing, or did you fall into some other category of marketing and then you ultimately were led more into fitness marketing?
I started out in unrelated to fitness marketing. And you talk about you got laid off at 30. I got laid off at 19 and 20, or 20 and 21. My first 2 jobs out of school, I got laid off. And I think there's so much resilience attached to athleticism. And there's a, when you lose as an athlete, I think most athletes have a mental way of, whether it's like, it's going to be the chip on my shoulder, whether it's going to be like, I'm going to show you, whether it's going to be, the message up on the bulletin board of like, this is what's going to motivate me. Having back-to-back layoffs to start my career was that for me. I was like, I am going to show you, like, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to find exactly what I want to do. I kind of had a similar moment as you, where it's like, I would rather take less money, but do what I love, work with people that I love, and proactively pursue that thing that I want to do for work. And so that really like started my career. And so I was in restaurant marketing, and because I had a franchising niche to my marketing background, I was able to go from restaurant marketing to fitness marketing. And it was LinkedIn that actually just kept on serving me this job at Gold's Gym. It was director of marketing for Gold's Gym. And it was in Dallas, Texas. And I'm like, I don't want to move to Dallas, Texas. I don't want to. But the algorithm kept on saying, move to Dallas, Texas, do this, do this. And it's just so funny now looking back, because when I applied, it was just from there, like doors opened, and it really just all came together because of the algorithm saying like, no, you need to do this. So
isn't that creepy? So scary. What year was this?
This was 2012. And so I was 30. I was 31. And it was the overlap of, I already knew I loved marketing. I already knew I loved franchising. I already knew I loved working with people, and then layer on fitness. And I loved fitness. And so it was just the overlap of all of those things combined that just opened up doors in my career, fast-tracked my career, put me in exactly where I needed to be and exactly where I would be happiest. I see there's so many people who could have amazing careers in fitness or in athletics in general, and they miss it because they're not overlapping the things together that they're great at.
Yeah, and I love that. So drivens are innately visual creatures. Believe it or not, the two genetic mutations that cause you to be driven and have dopamine sensing deficiency do something to the executive function in the front of your brain. It sort of, kind of tampers it down. So lack of structure and organization tends to be an issue, but we also tend to be visually dominant learners because of the fact that you have a hunter's brain, essentially, is the best way to put it. So hunters, extremely visual, that's your number one sense. And I love to do things visually. So as you're saying that, I'm imagining a Venn diagram, right? Like a four circle Venn diagram. You're like, I loved marketing. I loved fitness. You love the franchise world. And a 4 circle Venn diagram. I mean, you just really start to understand. But if it hadn't been for the fact that you were resilient and willing to try different things, you would have never figured out what it was that you were really interested in. So I'm curious to know, what was it about Gold's? And I think we got to kind of step it back here and help people out, because you think, okay, Gold's Gym. What comes to mind when you say Gold's Gym? A Venice Beach, Gold's Gym, right? Mm-hmm. Most people don't realize that many of the fitness boutique concepts that you see out there, whether it's, I know you ultimately worked for Exponential Fitness, whether it's, Row House or Stretch Lab or, you name it, Kid Strong or any of these concepts. And we'll get into that, obviously, since that's your path. Back it up and just kind of explain for folks exactly, when you say that you were doing marketing for Gold's Gym, you were doing marketing for Gold's Gym at the franchisor level, not so much. And I think that distinction needs to be made, because not all athletes want to ultimately become entrepreneurs. They might not have the risk tolerance and the appetite for that, but they could make excellent franchisees. So can you explain just a little bit about the relationship and what you were doing for Gold's, and ultimately how that would translate for the athlete franchisee that had a Gold's Gym in their local area?
Yeah. So Gold's Gym at the time that I was there was 2/3 franchise owned, 1/3 corporate owned. And so the franchisees, with the majority of the locations, had the control over the brand. So sitting in a marketing seat at the franchisor level, I would plug in with a committee of franchisees to essentially steer the brand and steer the marketing calendar. You kind of think of franchises as maybe like there's the ivory tower and the franchisor decides everything and it's like my way or the highway. But if you're doing it correctly, it's a lot more of a collaboration with your top franchise owners, with your most connected franchise owners. And it was definitely collaborative to map out like what the system needed, what we were going to focus on, what things were going to look like at the time. And I think probably still they are kind of balancing like, who are we as a brand? Because we have this bodybuilder brand background. And then we also know that women are such an important part of the fitness pocketbook these days. So how do you appeal to both at the same moment? And so we would really map out what that looked like for the brand. It was amazing to be in a seat that like had that impact over a brand that I loved, 96% unaided brand awareness of Gold's Gym. And then in a space that I loved, to be able to work in fitness and promote people living healthier lives. Again, is that a game you could play all day long? Absolutely. Like I could really play that all day long. And so even on days where it was frustrating or people were disagreeing or, and any of the things, it was an unlock of like, I love this. This is my dream job.
That's excellent. So you went into Gold, started in franchise marketing. When you left that role ultimately with Gold, what level were you at?
I left as a director, and
Okay.
I shouldn't say I left because I was kicked out of the family.
Uh-oh.
And
you were excommunicated and thrown out of the tribe and off the island. Is that what you're telling me?
I was laid off from Gold's Gym.
No,
So in my career,
layoff
I've
number
been
3.
Layoff number 3. And so I have so much compassion for people who go through layoffs. And there's been a ton of press around layoffs, especially in the tech space. But this layoff hit me so hard because it was something that I connected to so much. And I had that Venn diagram overlap. I had the passion. I felt like I was meant to do that job and like meant to be there. And again, it was my dream job. Voted out of the family.
Off the
What
island
now?
you go. Yeah, it's rough.
Like,
I'll tell you what, though, I think everybody should have to experience a layoff. I really do.
For sure.
I really think you should go through it. It's just, I mean, not only does it allow you to have empathy, right? But it just, for those of us that are driven, that are innately competitors, right? And you are obviously a competitor. I'm very much a competitor. I'm competitive with myself first and foremost. And then obviously with, the world around me, because that's the game of life. But when that happens, I remember crying and calling my mom and like walking home. And then it was like something switched in me and I got on the phone. I got my Padfolio out and I literally just started going down the line, calling every single contact and mentor that I had in Washington. And I could have easily turned on my heel and had another job, not long after the new year doing the same exact thing just for another, organization or back to Capitol Hill. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So when you got laid off and you, again, now you're another fork in the road, pivoting moment, what was going through your head now that you understood and you had that overlap, that Venn diagram, and you were dialed in and driven? What was the thought process there? Did you think about jumping ship and going and starting your own thing, and ultimately, what did you do next?
I thought about, at that point, I had unlocked the Venn diagram. Like I knew like the magic is going to be in something I love, but I love a lot of things. So Michael's craft store is here in Dallas. I love arts and crafts. I'm an artist by nature also. And so I was like, maybe I'll go work at Michael's. So I like apply to Michael. And I have been in the franchising space in restaurants. So maybe I'll go back to restaurant. Like I explored a lot of things and applied for a lot of things and had rejection from a lot of things. And you're just on a confidence decline and dark days. And it wasn't even days, it was months, dark months. And about 5 months into that decline, I just realized or connected the fact that like I loved the fitness part of the diagram. So like, let me just do that. Like, let me focus on fitness and just stay in that space. And so just like you got out your notepad, like I'm on LinkedIn, just scrolling through who do I know, who's where, who's working in fitness that could potentially like bring me in. And one of my contacts that was a restaurant contact in marketing was then a fitness person at UFit Health Clubs in Florida. And so he was in Florida. And so that's how messed up and driven I am, because I'm in Dallas, but I want this so bad. I'm commuting. I get a job with him and I'm commuting because my son is in Dallas. I'm not going to uproot him. I'm not going to uproot my ex-husband. Like they're good. You're here. I commute. And so I commute for a year,
Wow.
a year and a half. every Sunday flying back out. I was just like, is this the right thing to do? Is this the right thing to do? And so it's a year and a half there, and I get a phone call from a recruiter, and I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm commuting. Like, this is just a mess. Like, I can't do anything different at this moment. And he's like, well, what's your career goal? And I already told you, my career goal is to oversee a marketing department for a fitness company, global fitness company. Like I wanted that. He's like, you need to jump on the phone with me tomorrow. And so I call him, and he's like, I have this job, this CMO job at Club Pilates. And I remember calling my mom and saying, like, am I insane? She's like, yeah, but you're going to do it, and you're going to figure it out. And it's in California. So I'm like, okay, I give him a number that like makes it make sense mentally of like, I know I want this job. I know I want this title. I know I want this money. And they met all of those things. And so then I commuted to California for 3 years.
Wow.
So all told, I'm commuting for 4.5 years before the pandemic started. And so then the pandemic starts, and I'm able to work from home. And people to this day, they're like, you're so lucky you get to work from home. I'm like, I earned this.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. You lived in hotels for 4 years. You earned it, is right.
More so than that, I had an apartment. So I was double lifing it.
Oh,
double
wow.
life.
So you actually, yeah, I mean, you would have to at that point, right? If you were going to do it for that kind of it's not like a consulting gig where you're, flying out Sunday night and coming home Thursday evening. That's an all the time sort of thing. And you have a child.
All the time. Insane. But then it becomes like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go for it. Like, I'm going to take the biggest swing. I'm going to try to take from it as much as I give to it. So that's when I really started to commit to posting on LinkedIn. Like, I'm going to build my network. I'm going to lean on my title. I'm going to post as much as I can. I'm going to make a name for myself so that if this falls apart, then I at least can justify the commute time away from my son as like, okay, now it allowed me to do this. And I have that look back now, but like in the moment, I was definitely like, I'm insane. But I also did it. Like I knew I needed to do it, and I did it.
It's funny because what I'm completely focused on with Driven is helping people build their personal brands. And I've been such a behind the scenes person my entire career, out of necessity, and because it was what it was expected of me in the political world and in law enforcement and in, the tactical training world with government contractors that I have now. I understand that, right? You had to build your personal brand. You had to become a key person of influence in your industry. So that way, by going out there and, pitching your ideas and publishing content and raising your profile and developing your product ecosystem and ultimately forging partnerships that were going to be absolutely key. So the pandemic rolls around, you're with Club Pilates. Club Pilates, for those of you that don't know, is part of a larger portfolio company called Exponential Fitness. Is that correct? Yep. So they own many different concepts, boutique fitness concepts like Stretch Lab and Row House and some others, plenty of them, Cycle Bar. So what was your transition then from there? The pandemic hits, you're working from home, you have earned it at this point. And what was the jump and the thing, the spark that finally made you go, that's it, I'm doing it. I'm going to become a franchisor myself. I'm developing a concept on my own.
One of the dark sides of being driven.
I wrote an article about that. Love it.
I always want more. I want my own personal growth for me. What's next? And so I was 3 years into being CMO of Club Pilates. I was being asked to lead the other brands, but I wasn't being given the title of leading the other brands, nor really authority to make decisions over the other brands. And so I asked them, like, I want to be CMO over the whole thing. And they said no. And at the same time, I had an investor who came to me and said, would you want to start your own thing? And so if I'm choosing between stability, predictability, I was at 600 locations with Club Pilates. I knew there was 900 or 1,000 sold. So I knew I had more to open. So stay and do the same thing you've been doing, just more quantity, or do this brand new thing that you've never done before, that's going to challenge you, that's going to help you grow, that's going to completely push your mindset to a place it hasn't been before. I'm going to choose that like risky unknown all day long.
That's the
All day long.
daredevil. That's the daredevil quality and the driven. You needed that. You had to. Wow. That's again, second time now I've had goosebumps and chills during this conversation. It's just, like you said, the dark side of being driven, but you can use the dark side, the negative element of that part of your personality to fuel your growth.
And I am not a risk taker. So like, how do you de-risk that situation? In my mind, go back in time. When have I made a jump and not like risen to the occasion to be able to land on my feet? Mm-hmm. I've always been able to get it done. And so like, is this risky? Yes. Am I going to bet on myself to figure it out? Absolutely yes. And have I seen the benefit of stepping into something that I've never done before? When I became CMO of Club Pilates, I was director level before that. So I was completely into the unknown. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to go. I'm going to try. I'm going to push and I'm going to figure it out. Exactly the same kind of moment of like, have I ever been a CEO before? No. Have I ever started a business before? Absolutely not. Am I going to figure it out? Am I going to try my hardest? Am I going to figure it out? Yes. And that was really what prompted me to jump ship from Club Pilates and start Kick House.
So we've laid the foundation, Division I athlete, team and solo sport athlete. You cut your teeth working for other people as an employee, rose to the executive level, was doing that, was executing someone else's game plan. Again, like I said, you're wired with a hunter's brain, right? You're not born to be a farmer. The predictability and the stability of just doing the same thing over and over again for, probably you could have continued to do that job for another 10 years potentially. And you would have just sort of got, who knows what would have happened, right? So you've come to this again, another fork in the road, and you've decided that's it. I'm going to do it. Because of your profile, you attracted some attention from an investor. That's fantastic. Did you go into the idea of launching Kick House? First of all, why boxing? Number one. Number two, did you build it in mind with the idea of building one location, multiple locations? Did you go into it with a mindset of this is going to be a franchise and I'm going to be a franchisor? And did you build it to exit from the jump? I guess is my biggest question.
To rewind, the investor didn't find me because of what I had built. The investor connected to me because of a relationship that I had with a prior boss at UFIT Health Clubs in Florida. And so I think you're talking about the importance of personal brand, from a young age, also the importance of networking from a young age. Like start in school to build your network, because opportunities like that they're not posted online. It's like, It's definitely people to people. It's based on reputation. And I'm here today building a business without sales dollars, without marketing dollars, just solely on the back of my reputation. And so like, I want to clarify that because it is important. It's not like I was such a large, beacon of marketing excellence that he like found me. It was really because somebody said, go talk to her. And like, that's what connected us together. I was in the Pilates space. And so kickboxing is maybe like the exact opposite of the Pilates space. I was not a kickboxer. There were certain pieces on the board that were already kind of pointing to kickboxing. And there were players in the space that were already tackling kickboxing or tackling martial arts and doing so in a very masculine kind of martial arts way. And I knew from working at Club Pilates, a majority of boutique consumers are female. So we're going to enter the space and we're just going to completely lean into the girl boss aspect of kickboxing. Kickboxing is so much better for women than even boxing because it has the lower body aspect to it. So it has higher calorie burn. And it has like the stress relief, and it has like the lower body and like the hip mobility of females. It just is like a perfect fit. And the fact that no one took that slice at it was fascinating. And it was just there for the taking. And it didn't require me to be inauthentic, even though I'm not a kickboxer by nature. I'm a girl boss by nature. So like, let me staff with kickboxing people. Let me align with other kickboxing people. I didn't go into it thinking like I'm going to lead with my kickboxing expertise at all. We went in with the idea to be a franchise. That was always the goal, to be 100% franchise owned, just like an exponential fitness play. We didn't necessarily go in with the idea that we were going to exit as fast as we did. We had the goal to go in and build it to be a nationwide brand, which it easily still could be, build it to like a couple hundred locations and then exit. And we exited at 30 locations. So it definitely wasn't the plan. I think you have moments of like going with the flow and going with like, what are the cards in my hand at this exact moment? And it was the right time to play that card.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, just so many amazing touch points. I mean, you're a natural born brander. When it comes to marketing, the piece that a lot of people don't realize is that you have to lay the foundation with the brand. That's the reason why I'm so focused on the brand. Once an athlete decides upon and develops their personal brand, and they decide they want to go and actually activate that brand and turn it into a concept, the ability that Drivens have because of those dopamine sensing deficiencies to connect disparate dots, right? And to channel that monkey mind and to really read between the lines and intelligently look for white space in the market. You said you're creative. I'm very creative myself too. And that's something that I find with a lot of my Drivens, a lot of my athletes, is that, people look at them and they're like, oh, you're just, you're always such a jock. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't realize like, he or she likes to sketch or draw or, paint or sculpt, or there's some creative, artistic piece there too, because the thing that's beautiful about it is you built something that was radically differentiated. You found a good market. You knew by looking at the data, because you were data driven, that it was a good market to be in. And you saw an overlap. Again, this goes back to the Venn diagram, right? Where was that space? There's a trend that you're riding, obviously, but then how can you really uniquely differentiate yourself and stand out from the players that are already in the space that, like you said, from your background and experience that the majority of boutique fitness concepts like this really are geared towards women. So yeah, why wouldn't? That's just so logical. Why wouldn't you build a concept in that space? So you grew to 30 locations. Were they predominantly clustered in one area of the country? Did you have kind of nationwide territory options at that point before you exited?
We had locations from California to Maryland. So our footprint was kind of strange. But a lot of it was connected digitally and like connected online. So, sometimes you don't want to build from a nationwide footprint. You want to build from a region and then build out. But for us, because it was also the pandemic, it was like, who wants to play at this point? Because a lot of people decided to sit that game out, which I don't blame them because it was a difficult game to play. But we kind of just aligned like who wants to be in, like who wants to stay in this game, ride this out, and took whoever geographically that wanted to play.
So ultimately, you and your investors and anybody else that's in the business that had a say, you ultimately decide to exit. And can you say who you exited to?
We exited to Mayweather Boxing and Fitness, and they still own Kickhouse to this day.
So here you go again. So here you have this very big peak dopamine spike. And one of the things people don't realize is that as a Driven, when you are dopamine sensing deficient and you have a peak dopamine event, like, exiting your business to a big player like that, you actually drop below baseline and potentially could very well fall into depression and really not feel so great. So what did you do to mitigate that? Was there any kind of like post-exiting blues, or did you just kind of like ride the wave and say, great, what's next?
You might have to elaborate on being dopamine deficient, because to me, it wasn't a win, I didn't feel a win to exit. So like, I didn't feel a high. I don't feel like highs as much as I don't want to say I feel lows either. I just feel like there. And maybe that ties into dopamine sensing deficiency.
Yeah. So the big thing is that being driven, and I mean, you have every indication of being highly driven just from your story and your background and the things that you've said, is that if not positively checked, having these peak dopamine experiences, like after I rode my bicycle across the country, I immediately was leaving to go to Washington, D.C. for a semester away to intern with the Department of Justice. And I was taking my LSAT to go to law school. So I kind of had other conduits and channels. Oftentimes, the biggest thing that I find is that when one experience comes to an end for a driven, whether it's, athletics and like a really high level peak of competition, especially your Olympic athletes, and professional athletes, sometimes really, really bad. Or something, like the end of your military or law enforcement career after an entire career. There can be times where if you are not prepared to channel your drive into your next thing, that driven energy can become, unfortunately, very self-destructive.
That's such a good call out. And I didn't do this intentionally, but I kind of immediately went into my next thing. It's not because I needed another goal, but it's just that once I saw the entrepreneurship thing and was like, I started to understand that game. I was like, okay, I built that and like, I'm proud of it. But now I could either live in that chapter and mentally die in that chapter, or I go to the next. And so I've had so many good chapters, but I've had chapters. And so like, I've just learned when a chapter closes, whether it's an athletic chapter or whether it's a professional chapter, it is like next.
Yep.
And I don't have that rest period. It's not a time of like, oh, did you take a month? I don't take any time off. Like, I'm like, what's the next thing? So I think it was May, like I filed the next trademarks in May. And so like, it was a period of months of in between, maybe 2 months, where like by the time I left to like when I started the next thing. And now my brain almost goes to the next thing before it's even there. So there's other things that I haven't filed yet, but I know they're out there. And I'm kind of like, they're in the back of my mind. I have a ton of domain names. I'm definitely that person that's like,
I heard you say that. I saw that on a post. You were posting that. And I'm like, I feel so much better that I'm not the only person that is hoarding domain names for all these concepts that I want to build when the time is right.
Yeah. And it is, it's just like a garden. Like, what am I planting today? What am I planting next season? What am I going to plant a year from now? And so right now, my garden is kind of two main pieces. I have a fitness concept called Flex Society that is like splitting the difference between a club Pilates kind of workout and more of an F45 workout. So something that sits in the place of, or in between strength and stability, in between strength and mobility. And then simultaneously have a marketing arm of that, which is called Sizzle Society. And then I have the podcast, which is the Society Pod. So it's a little bit of an ecosystem. And so coming from where I was with Kick House, which was like strictly a fitness concept, and it was really just that. Now I'm like, what's the next? And the next is like ecosystem. I can play in a lot of different places, in a lot of different directions. I could scratch a lot of different itches and build a lot of different things simultaneously and kind of flow between them depending on what's unlocking in any given moment.
I love it. You're building a branded house, and that's exactly what you should be doing. I mean, you've gotten to that point, and there's power in ecosystems because you're going to be continuing to serve, you're scratching the itch, but then you're also serving a niche part of clientele that are just going to really find a way to benefit from what it is that you're doing in all these different ways. So that's awesome. So what's next for you then? What do you think the next chapter is going to look like? I know you have really doubled down on your content and, potentially tell us about what's going on with Gary V.
I'm going to go big on content this summer. Good. So my son is 13 and he has a bunch of friends who are around 13 also. I'm just going to bring all of them in as interns to help me with content. And I know from following Gary that like I need to do more content, but I'm a business builder and then I do content on the side. But as part of my ecosystem, the problem with it is there's so many places to be and there's so many channels to participate in. And my personal brand is an aspect of that ecosystem, which I didn't call out, but really my personal brand like almost sits like in the target center of the ecosystem. And so I need to fuel my personal brand and then have that fuel the other pieces as well. So we are definitely playing like a heavy content game. And the Gary V, I go to VCon every year, and I applied to be a speaker at VCon. And I don't have a large platform, nor do I have, a big brand attached to my resume at this moment. And so there's all sorts of reasons why it wouldn't make sense for me to be a speaker. But I thought, going back to like how you do one thing is how you do everything. If I'm going to try, I'm going to go the extra mile. So I'm going to post about it frequently to show them, like I'm going to tag them to show them how much I care, to show them how I show up for things that I care about. I'm not just going to go the inch. I'm going to go the mile. I'm going to apply to be a speaker, and then I'm going to post about it every single day. I'm going to tag you. I'm going to remind you that like I want to be a speaker. And at the end of the day, what are the chances that I will be selected? It might be 20%, but that's part of it for my personal brand is I'm going to show everyone who's watching me, whether they're an athlete or not, that I don't care if I fall on my face in front of you guys. That's part of it. That's part of building businesses. That's part of being an athlete is I'm going to lose games. I'm going to have moments where I'm sitting on the sidelines. I'm going to have moments where I've fallen flat on my face and I just don't care about showing that loss publicly because I know that that loss is learnings for me. And I know that the loss is just part of the process. And so I am in just like a process game right now. Like I love the game. I don't have a destination. I don't know where I'm going to end up 5 years from now, but it's like, what is the game? And the game is like play in your strengths, play in your passions, put as much toward it as you can, connect all the pieces on the board as much as you can, add other good people into the game where you can, including my son, which is like starts that legacy grind, and leave all the breadcrumbs along the way. So I'm going to show you when I fall on my face. I'm also going to show you when I do something cool. And hopefully it makes it easier for the next person coming up.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, that's a perfect way to kind of cap it off here. It's just building in public, build it while you fly it, and show the journey along the way. So few people are willing to kind of pull back the curtain and show just how difficult it can be, how lonely it can be to go on this journey. But the reality is the more you share about it, the more transparent you are, the other people can relate to it. I mean, just you even saying the thing about, having, a GoDaddy account full of domain names, just who does that, right? Other people that are like you, other driven athlete entrepreneurs that are in the midst of trying to figure out and carve out what their legacy is going to be. And I love the fact that you said you don't know what's next and you shouldn't know what's next. What you do know is that you are well equipped with a compass to navigate any kind of terrain that is thrown your way. You're incredibly resilient. You're able to shift your identity however you need to. And you recognize that showing up with that front and center attitude of I'm going to go the extra mile, that's ultimately is what is going to continue to get you noticed and continue to put just blessings in your pathway for you to take or not. And I love it.
Well, and continue to connect me with people like you, because like attracts like.
Yep.
And so I know you're passionate about the personal branding side, and I'll just call out the fact that even if you're an athlete in college, start thinking and building your personal brand, and your brand can evolve over time, but who you are and how you do what you do is largely going to remain the same. And so start it as early as you can, because your personal brand is your reputation. Mm-hmm. And so then you could build businesses on your reputation. You can build businesses on your personal brand. And especially with NIL deals, there's been no greater time to come out of college as an entrepreneur as it is today, because you have the ability while you're in college to start your entrepreneurship game, start the side hustle through NIL deals, things like that. And then you really have the green light once you're through to build what you want to build. So like you cannot underthink your personal brand. And then as you go in your career, your personal brand or your network or your reputation, however you want to really like define it, it's everything. It will determine the opportunities that hit your plate, that hit your career, that can really determine the trajectory of your career. So don't underthink it.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 kinds of luck, and this was written about by a researcher back in the 1970s. I'm going to talk about this in an upcoming video and a blog post. But, you know, you have blind luck, right? The circumstances of your birth, who you were born to, what country, you know, all those things that are just completely out of your control. And that's really kind of what sort of steers maybe the first, 7 to 10 years of your life. But then ultimately, there's 3 other types of luck. And one of the biggest things is luck through motion. And also just increasing your luck surface area. You can become more lucky by choosing, you know, the content that you do decide to consume. You should be creating content also, and also just who you surround yourself with, whether they're people that are in your life on the day-to-day in the physical world, or they're people that are online. Even backing it up now, you know, I look at everything through the lens. Ultimately, if I had to boil down this brand and the people in the tribe that I'm serving and you're serving are high performance humans. Athletics and being an athlete is a manifestation of that. Being a driven executive or franchisee is a manifestation of that. Being a entrepreneur who develops a single business or, you know, is a franchisor and a concept, that is a manifestation of being high performance. Being a high performance human and knowing that you're a high performance human and that you're a driven human is such an incredible way to distinguish yourself in the world. There's a Japanese proverb that says the nail that sticks up gets hammered. And I know oftentimes in a world that kind of encourages us to, you know, be like other people and look like other folks and act a certain way, being uniquely you and really standing out and radically differentiating yourself from the crowd with a well thought out personal brand that starts with getting to know yourself and what makes you tick is something that can make you very attractive to colleges, not only as an athlete, but also as a scholar. It can be very attractive to employers, whether it's a job that you have in high school or college, an internship, an apprenticeship, whatever it may be, carrying into your career. Like you said, at the end of the day, just take the word brand and replace it with reputation. And Warren Buffett always says, right, you can build your reputation over 20 years and destroy it in 5 minutes. Especially with this younger generation. And I think we're fortunate in that when we were born in this world, we didn't have social media growing up. And I'm grateful for that in a way, just because it allowed us to kind of allow our brains to mature a bit. But today in the world that we live, for those athletes that are listening to this, or parents that are listening to this, if you have children and they're athletes, regardless of whether they're going to be able to play in college or not, they should be building a personal brand. And that really starts early. We're talking high school, without a doubt.
And I like the way that you framed up luck and thinking of it as surface area. And the greater your online presence, the greater your surface area, yep. The greater the likelihood of somebody stumbling upon you, a kismet, just like happenstance, happy accidents, and you connecting with somebody who's really going to help you do something amazing in your athletic career, in your professional career.
Yeah. And this is not just like ethereal woo-woo that I'm pulling out of the air. These are all really well-researched concepts that have been published for, 50 years. I mean, even things like Dunbar's numbers, right? I mean, people really need to have at a bare minimum, 7 hours of content, 11 touch points that people have to basically, comes out of Google, that people basically need 7 hours of content to binge on. They want to go to your Instagram page or your LinkedIn or your YouTube, and they want to be able to get to know you because once you get to that point of that 7 hour mark and you get to that 11 impressions across, 4 platforms, essentially is basically what the research shows. You feel like you know a person and you're more in their inner circle. And that's really what it takes to build a tribe, regardless of whether it's a tribe of fans and people that are not your ideal audience and that are never going to buy from you. But you need those folks, because those are the people that give you the juice and give you the energy and share your stuff. That ultimately, as I like to say, it's like Batman throwing the bat signal up in the sky. Jessica decides what her brand is, and she throws that bat signal up in the sky, and it draws in the tribe. And that's exactly what you're doing. So it's just so awesome to see. I love seeing people succeed. I love seeing driven humans channel their incredible drive. I do truly believe that entrepreneurs are, we are in the midst of an entrepreneur revolution, and that entrepreneurs really stand to sort of, shape the world in a very positive way, even as we start to look at forces like artificial intelligence and other things. So
100%. And I appreciate you bringing all the science background to my life. It makes it make a little bit more sense.
Yeah. It's so funny though, I'll have people, the joke is I make people cry. I make moms cry and I make athletes cry. Because when the buzzer sounds for the last time and the lights go out, who are you going to be after that? Right? Like, what's next for you? And it's just like this moment of crisis, or the parents, and particularly the moms next. It's like, I'm so scared. Like, all my kid has known is fill in the blank sport since the age of 5. And it's, they play it 3 seasons and they don't know anything other than that. And it's just like, okay, we need to back it up a little bit here. And again, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but there's some really compelling research that came out that shows that individuals, athletes that are entrepreneurial and have a higher likelihood of success in entrepreneurship, for some reason, were solo sport athletes, and they're not quite sure. They're scratching their head as to why it's not necessarily a connection to being a team athlete. I have some theories as to why that is. I think you ultimately need both. You should be a solo sport athlete. I was a combat sports athlete, as a martial artist my whole life, among other things, and but played those team sports too. And it takes all types, right? So it's just really fantastic when I get excited, and like you said, you could do it all day long, forever. I mean, and for the rest of my life, my ultimate intention is to turn 1,000 high performance athletes into 7-figure entrepreneurs, because then that way we can say that Driven Human has put $1 billion worth of value out into the world. And I could die a happy woman if that happens, and it will happen.
Well, you're in the right Venn diagram, because the one thing to me that is the superpower of being an entrepreneur who has been an athlete is my mindset and my control over my mind. It's a differentiator. Differentiator is not the right word. It's what keeps me in this game. Like, it's what keeps me sane. It's what keeps me, like, the whole thing, building a business is a mind game. It's just, how can you trick your mind to keep going when it's hard, keep going when you're in the mud, and keep going when you're halfway across the country and you have 1,500 more miles to go. Geez, how do you do that? Yeah. Oh, because I've run a marathon. I know what it's like to feel like your tank is drained, but know you have more work to do. Dig in, get it done. And the mindset is everything. And so however I could help you in what you're trying to do, and support the cause of building the entrepreneurs, I know it's there. I want to share, before we jump off, I want to share my 2 unlock books for my own mind.
Leave us with something Carol good Dweck's, to read.
You got to do, this is homework. I'm leaving you guys with homework. Carol Dweck's Mindset is an amazing book. It's just about having a growth mindset about life in general. It's less about the athletic side. But this book, Thinking Bodies, Dancing Minds, I've read this book 4 times. My field hockey coach in high school gave it to me. I was a goalkeeper in high school. And being a goalkeeper is the biggest mind mess of all time. You go from being the highs and the lows of being a goalkeeper is the worst. And I was a mental mess in high school. And she gave me this book, and it just connects themes of athletics to business to life, and goes through all sorts of themes like self-doubt, fear of success, fear of failure. And if you're an athlete who has a vision of succeeding in business, I would buy this book and just sit and read it in a day, because it's it's game changing. And the ability to have control over your mind and your mindset is the absolute unlock for entrepreneurship.
Yes, it is. We will leave it there. That's going on the list next. Best thing about having a business for all of you is it's a business book and it's going to get written off. I have a whole stack of books. I'm a voracious reader now. I was never a voracious reader, but I am now, and it is powerful stuff. So thank you so much, Jessica. This has been an incredible conversation. I know that everyone listening is going to take major things away from it, and they better go put that book on their reading list next. What's the best way we can connect with you? What's the best way we can connect with you?
All of the places. I just told you I'm in the content game heavy. Most heavy on LinkedIn, on X, on Instagram, on Facebook. I am all the places, all under my full name, Jessica Yarmy.
As it should be. Perfect way to find you.
All right. Thank you so much, Colette. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Society Pod.